I don't know if you saw this. I actually find this kind of hilarious that this was a breaking story. I don't know if you saw the reports coming out that Xi Jinping warned Biden during the APEC summit that China will reunify Taiwan with China. And this was seen as a huge breaking story, which is interesting because I feel like China's been very consistent on this issue. But essentially,
they were always exactly. There's no news.
the intimation, though, the intimation, though, from this is that, and what reports are saying, is that Xi Jinping stated this very firmly to Biden that this will happen, but it will happen peacefully unless separatism. The clear line of the Chinese being articulated, but the way that it was articulated was panic that, China is going to move on this now. A recycled story, but I'm wondering your impressions about it, the timing of it in particular, given all that's going on in West Asia, Ukraine, etc.
Well, they needed something to put Taiwan back on the table, no? Because what's happening in Gaza and now the Yemen strategic move, Taiwan disappeared completely from the news. Just like Ukraine completely disappeared from the news, but for other reasons, right? Because of the process of throwing Zelensky under the bus started at least a month from now. And now that we have the latest numbers of the terrain in Donbass, it's even worse. and that the apex of their despair is little Blinky saying that Russia lost the war anyway. So now we can get out because they already lost. Gosh, but this is if you kids in primary school, they have a better understanding of life than these people. Huh? Oh gosh. But what was your question, Danny? I'm sorry. I start thinking about something else.
No, just your impressions of this story and the timing of it,
and the timing. The timing. That's it, because they needed Taiwan back on the table. By the way, coming back to our discussions in Astana, one of the members of the round table was I call him always extremely entertaining, Edward Luttwak. So I discussed cows in Bolivia with Edward a lot. But when we started discussing China, it was very, very complicated because he's totally obsessed. He says that the war already started. This is the only war that matters, and that China is going to lose. So this is his brief, essentially. And when he had his when we were in a panel that we're also discussing China, this is basically what he said. And even the other analysts were like, what? But that's it. But Edward, as many of you probably know, is extremely influential. He has been advising the Pentagon, National Security Council, CIA, for 50 years. So they pay attention to him in the Beltway in different silos and all that. So he's a very, very dangerous character. So if he's saying that, this means that he's reflecting a sort of consensus among very, very powerful players in the Beltway. Very, very dangerous. But I remember another one which is even better. And okay, he's gonna kill me if he hears about it, but no problem. We had a very short conversation, Danny, on Israel. I asked him, Edward, what is Israel's strategy in the end? He said, don't touch us or we will kill you. His own words. And then I said, well, that precludes the use of diplomacy, which is part of our conversation today.
Yeah.
His last words, no diplomacy. I think that tells all of you watching us what substantial, powerful centers in the empire think about the whole Israel-Gaza drama. That's it. I think in a nutshell, that's it.
And it's accepted.
Unfortunately, I'm very sorry to tell you that, but that's it.
It's acceptable.
Yeah.
It's acceptable for it to not be an option. While we're panicking about, the United States and the neocons are panicking about China expressing that it wants to diplomatically resolve the Taiwan question within the realms of international law. I mean, that is the definition of sociopathy, like looking at the world in this way. It's a threat.
They're evil communists.
They want to invade. And Israel is not a threat for rejecting diplomacy altogether.
But this proves, among other things, that they have not been paying attention to what the Chinese have been saying since Deng Xiaoping himself, when he was still alive in his last years during the 90s. Deng Xiaoping said, we are not in a hurry. Taiwan will be reincorporated with the motherland. It can take a long time. And this will happen before 2049. His words. Everybody knows this in China, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in the Chinese diaspora all over. Everybody knows this. And everybody remembers his own words. We're not in a hurry. And this was later repeated by Jiang Zemin, by Hu Jintao, by Xi, etc. So what he told Biden, for 30 years, they have been saying exactly the same thing. So this is not news. They had to turn it into, wow, these evil communists, they want to do it peacefully. No, they can't. Out of the question. They have to invade.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I've never been to Taiwan proper. I've been in Taipei's airport on my way to Vietnam.
You've been to,
it's nice, but
by the way, Danny,
but it's different.
The food is outstanding.
The
food in Taiwan is to die for.
I've heard with that in but the Taipei airport, it's different. Like it is different. There's acceptance of, for example, Falun Gong. There was a Falun Gong shrine there, very awkward in my opinion. The insignia is very awkward of the Falun Gong. It looks very similar to the swastika, but in any event, it's different. China has allowed a huge, like if you go to Beijing International, you go to Daxing, it's much different than what you'd find in Taipei. So you can even just spend times in the airports, you'll see the massive difference. And China has allowed that. And China's been very patient. So you're right, Pepe, that the panic over this is definitely manufactured. And it just shows the lack of diplomacy that they're not willing to engage in. So they're saying Israel will never engage in diplomacy. They themselves do not want to. Because why shouldn't Xi Jinping, in a conversation face-to-face with Joe Biden, whatever he can actually digest, why shouldn't he remind the United States that there is an international commitment that must be followed around time? Why should he not do that? That makes a whole lot of sense if you're having a diplomatic conversation with a counterpart that is literally violating the one China principle every single day.
Exactly. And the Chinese, they count the violations every day. You say you're in favor of the one China principle. Look what you said today. Well, this reminds me of the handover of Hong Kong. I was there covering it. And there was an absolute paranoia among the Western media was there en masse at the time. They thought that the PLA was going to invade Taiwan at midnight. They actually believe in it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, the handover of Hong Kong, one of the most peaceful,
peaceful
exchanges between a colonial power and
the only drama, Danny, was then Prince Charles weeping, and both daughters of Chris Patton, the last governor, they were crying actually, and Prince Charles was weeping when he left in his own yacht for the last time. It was raining, and then everybody in Hong Kong went to the best nightclubs in town, party like crazy. That was fantastic. And no invasion from the PLA. Oh. Evil communists.
No kidding. Especially in the 90s. To believe that would happen even in that time period seems to be just so disconnected from reality. But of course, they wanted to keep the this narrative that China is a threat of some kind, even in the warmest of times, which in those times it was the warmest of times between the West and China. I wanted to ask,
yes, go ahead,
really
go ahead, go ahead.
I wanted to ask you about the larger situation with China now, given that there were these talks. This story seems to be an attempt to undercut some cooling, whether it's illusory or not. There is this cooling that's happened between the United States and China, with the U.S. being the one to facilitate it, in the sense that they're the ones making the calls. They're the ones who want to have these meetings, and China was rejecting them for quite some time. But this fits into developments. You have, of course, Ukraine disaster. You also have an election coming up, which appears to be a disaster. Trump literally getting taken off the ballot in Colorado. There's chaos. Biden is not looking good. His polling numbers are probably at their lowest point. And so it almost feels like cooling with China is like a pause in and of itself.
A pause.
A pause. You have Taiwan's elections coming up. Separatism appears to be still moving forward there. And it seems like only a matter of time before China makes it back into its place of, as you've written over and over again, that China and Russia, they are the principal targets. And Antony Blinken, Mr. Blinky, as you were calling him, in his end of the year press conference, what was the first two things he talked about? Russia and China. Not
he started
Gaza.
With Russia and China,
Gaza was at the end. Gaza was very much at the end.
Yeah.
Russia first, and then China next, talking about position of strength and all this nonsense. So I wanted to know your take.
Well, this is going to be probably my last column of the year, Danny. I'm going to write it tomorrow morning. Basically, the tone of the column is Russia, China are on a roll, because the partnership is on a roll. And this visit this week of Mishustin to Beijing with a high-level delegation, talking directly to Xi, in fact, and Putin a few days ago announcing zillions of investment in railways all over Russia, especially Russian Far East and regions bordering China. And there is something extraordinary, which I'm going to talk about in my column, which is the province of Heilongjiang in China is going to be essentially attached to the Russian Far East. This is enormous. You know what they are doing, and this has been approved by the Duma already, and it's going to be submitted to the National People's Council in Beijing, I think next March. Co-management of Heilongjiang and these areas across the border in the Russian Far East. So this means a lot of Chinese investment to develop the Russian Far East, which is something that we already knew. When I went to the forum in Vladivostok this year, this was the number one item in all the discussions. And there was a huge delegation at the forum in Vladivostok. And the fact that Chinese companies and workers can have back and forth transit across the border with no visa, and the same would apply to Russians. So basically, these regions will be integrated. And the capital of Heilongjiang province is Harbin. Harbin is among the top 10 most important cities in China. And they are considering now, this is going to happen. Harbin is going to have direct federal administration straight from Beijing, which is something that happens with Chongqing and Shanghai, for instance. So Harbin is going to be at the top level of important Chinese cities. Why? Because it's going to be the main hub for the integration between a Chinese province and parts of the Russian Far East. So this is all part of the symbiosis Russia-China and, let's say, the construction of multipolarity in the Russian-China way. They are applying it over there on the spot, and everybody will look at it and they say, well, why don't we do this ourselves as well? So we can have this special economic zone style arrangements popping up everywhere in Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia. That's absolutely fascinating. I doubt if people talk about this in the US. I think it's not even published in the US, something like this,
No.
But these things are so important, because these are practical examples of economic integration. Same thing about the connectivity corridors. And there's another angle that I think we don't have time to explore, at least today, the war of connectivity corridors in West Asia, which is directly linked to Red Sea, Suez Canal, if they're going to build the Ben Gurion Canal or not, IMEC, that thing, if it works or not. For the moment, it's dead on the water, right? The role of Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and Iran in the Belt and Road, because they're all part of Belt and Road as well. So these geoeconomic discussions and the connectivity corridor angle and economic integration angle is even more important than these intimations of war. No?
Definitely. Yeah, and it's also it's Russia. It's happening out east. It's happening in West Asia, and there has been a flurry in terms of being on a roll. China, Vietnam, that visit
China, Vietnam
is massively successful.
Ultra success, and not many people were expecting it. Eh?
No, I was just there, and
you were there. Exactly,
similar to how you were talking about, public opinion in Kazakhstan being a little cool on Russia. Vietnam, of course, public opinion is not the highest on China.
Exactly.
There's still a lot of, in my opinion, it's misgivings, but that's just my opinion in terms of 1,000 years of history, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but they had serious
and the 79
geopolitical problems in the past.
Yes, and the Cold War, the Sino-Soviet split. All those things are very legitimate. And at the same time, the fact that Vietnam's leadership, the CPV, went about its state visit that Xi Jinping conducted there in the way that it did was, I think, a huge message. And then you also have, Thailand, despite its opposition government, which those members of that government were keen on burning Chinese infrastructure during their color revolution period. Now they're saying they're going to accelerate the high-speed rail development.
Finally,
that China is. So China, yes, on a roll, and Russia right there too. And but you don't hear about this at all. These are the things you'll get Xi Jinping warned about Taiwan. You'll never hear what China and Russia too are building.
Exactly.
To cement this connectivity, this integration, and the larger multipolar world.
Exactly. This story in Thailand, in fact, my Thai friends, every time that I go to Thailand, they brief me on the. They talked why Laos in 4 years had their high-speed rail built by China with no hitches at all, and Thailand, the process started years before and nothing happened still. Their main, I asked them this question. They said, essentially corruption. Well, Thailand is Thailand is a mecca of corruption. We all know that. Generals, sub-generals, whatever. But now it's very funny, because now when they have an opposition government, which is not exactly pro-Chinese, they understood that they need that, because the thing is connectivity corridors from China straight to us. That's it. How we cannot say no to that? High-speed rail on top of it. So we need it, Zach. So now finally this thing is going. Finally, it's going to take another 4 years to build it, at least 5 years.
Right.
But they looked at Laos and it's fascinating, because the Laos are there's a joke in Southeast Asia. The Laos are so slow that you cannot even hear them.
It's crazy. I was learning about Laos while I was in Vietnam, and people were telling me, "Oh, you know, like most of Laos is not populated. Like,
it's not populated.
It's just land. It's just empty land." I'm like, I had no idea, but now I know.
Exactly. Empty forest, beautiful,
Yes,
lush tropical forest.
All right.
But and they're the most gracious people on earth. They are the ultra cool Buddhists, you know. And obviously nobody's in a hurry to do anything. But with this thing, when they saw the benefits that they could get of, okay, we're gonna have a Chinese investment on high speed coming to us all the time. Okay, let's do it.
Right.
There you go. And the Thais woke up much later.
Right.
The Thais are so
hoping.
Exactly.
I was saying the same thing when I was in Vietnam. You know, I was like, hey, why is it so slow to develop rail in general, both high speed, which has been put on the back burner for a long time to even start designing, and the transit system, which China built one in Hanoi, which goes a very short distance within a very small amount of districts. But in general, there's some construction that happened, but it's much slower. And I asked, well, why is this? What's holding up? And, you know, some people are like, oh, well, the CPV is not as fast as the CPC, underdevelopment, different concerns, focusing on other things first. But it'll be interesting to see as Thailand, Laos is number one. I think that helped motivate some renewed discussions about developing rail. And Thailand, if their construction gets off the ground, Indonesia, you have now the Jakarta ban on high-speed rail.
They are fascinated with the Jakarta Bandung high-speed rail, and they want, and now they want it all over the place.
Yeah, and Vietnam is compared to Thailand and Indonesia. I mean, Vietnam's development, its standard of living is really good. So comparatively, hopefully we'll see. I think we will continue to see these in China being a key role. Of course, I think we'll see these things progress in China being key in this. But of course, we have to worry about the Taiwan, the Taiwan threat, which to China is not a threat at all.
It's going to be one country, three systems, Danny, essentially. What then conceptualized for Hong Kong apply to Taiwan.
Right.
So for the moment, we still have one country, two systems with Hong Kong, slowly now being incorporated into Guangdong province, the Greater Bay Area project, which is basically 10 cities integrated. And Hong Kong has a special role because of connections with the West, merchandising, PR, propaganda, financial services, fintech, etc. And Taiwan is going to be one country, three systems. Same thing. They will become a sort of autonomous province of China, like Hong Kong still is, special administrative region, SAR. Taiwan is going to be the same thing. The symbiosis, geoeconomic symbiosis already exists. We have thousands of engineers back and forth all the time. You know, industrially, in information technology, it's total symbiosis. But try to explain that to a bunch of ideologues in the West. That's the difference. These people are not realpolitik practitioners. They are ideologues. It's completely different.
No, as long as they're rich, they're happy. they don't care about any of this. You know, as long as they're rich. If Taiwan, a war there will make them rich. If they're happy. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.